This morning, the Supreme Court recognized that the Constitution guarantees marriage equality. In doing so, they've reaffirmed that all Americans are entitled to the equal protection of the law, that all people should be treated equally, regardless of who they are or who they love.
Same-sex marriage is the law of the land in the United States. It is a crime, according to the highest court in the land. Yet in Texas, the state government is already making exceptions for their employees who have a hard belief in their faith. And one presidential candidate is already calling for civil disobedience from those who do not want to have the government involved in marriage. Is this a fight that simply has no endpoint and no logical compromise? Our guest is co-founder and editor-in-chief at LifeSiteNews.com, billed as the world's largest pro-life, pro-family daily news website, also co-founder of Voice of the Family. John Henry Westen joins the Hardline. John, thanks so much for being here, and I guess I have to start out by saying, when you hear those words, that same-sex marriage is now law of the land, how much does that chafe at you?
Good to be with you, Ed. Thank you. And it is a very true thing that today's reality in the United States is that there is a loggerheads, a real fight that will not end peacefully between the forces of those who would want to promote same-sex marriage to all and sundry and those who insist on the traditional definition of marriage as the union of one man and one woman. And that, speaking from international experience like we have here at LifeSite News, is a battle that does not end with peace either. There is a continuing battle for the hearts and souls, especially of children, in this war.
John, you just said will not end peacefully. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that, as we've already seen in places like France, in much of Europe, there is a continuing propagation for traditional marriage and for the right to speak of one's faith openly. We've already had cases like in Switzerland where Pastor Ake Green was threatened with jail time for preaching the truth on marriage from a Christian standpoint. In Canada, we had the Human Rights Tribunal, just after marriage was passed, take up a bishop for preaching the basic truth of Catholic teaching on homosexuality. These things continue with increased poignancy against religious freedom and against parental rights. We've seen, especially in Canada over the last year, an increasing want to give education, sex education, which teaches the quote-unquote equality of all families to children despite the parents' wishes, with parents not able to withdraw their children from those classes.
What about those people who would say, wait a minute, look at the Rasmussen poll, the most recent one that was released. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I want to give you a chance to get your point out. The Rasmussen poll that shows that a majority of Americans, a wide majority of Americans, are okay with same-sex marriage at this point, which goes in direct conflict to what you just said.
Well, it actually doesn't, because while there might be a majority, that's no surprise considering Hollywood has almost mandated that every show portray this as a good, valuable, viable alternative to marriage. In fact, part of marriage always, with that amount of propaganda, you are bound to see a shift in the public sphere. Also, we've seen an almost total lack of preaching from the pulpits of America, from the Christian pulpits that should have been voicing this message, the concern over homosexuality and over same-sex marriage. Over the past 40 years almost, virtual silence from the pulpits, while the secular pulpits have been screaming out their doctrine over every screen, book, and magazine that just about exists. So we're dealing with a lack of information, especially about the health effects of this behavior.
Well, let me do this, John, because I've only got about a minute left. I want to make sure we get something in here. And again, here comes the other side. They will say, and again, that devil's advocate, I got a minute left. The people who will look at you and say, the children of same-sex marriage seem to be very well off. They seem to be very well adjusted. And also what goes on in the bedroom is none of your business. How do you then answer that? Because that is a very popular retort.
You've got to look at the studies that show the real harm to children. Those are the ones actually with representative samples where the other ones don't. There are many researchers out there who will attest the studies that show that there is harm, in fact, from 2 children of same-sex couples are the studies that are actually representative samples. And so those are the ones you got to look at. The behavior is known to be harmful. Everybody knows this, and we have just put a societal stamp of approval upon a behavior that is harmful for the human body at the same time when we're telling people who smoke cigarettes they shouldn't do that.
10 seconds. Do you agree with Mike Huckabee, who says that civil disobedience is the way?
It's absolutely necessary, because if Americans are going to stand up for their faith, now is the only time to do that, before it is snuffed out, not only in their generation, but they're going after the children first, even against the parents' wishes. So if you want religious freedom, stand up now.
There you go. John Henry Westen, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. We will continue to follow this and so much more when we continue right here on the fastest 60 Minutes in News.